We are awaiting the executive order on this so that we can get a clear picture of how today's news impacts our province.
We don't want to discourage these Canadian tourists who are so vital to Maine's economy from vacationing in Maine because they are so angry at what has happened.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki, Hogarth.
We're starting this week in St. Stephen, where some patients started receiving letters from a doctor who passed away in February, Dr. S.K. Bedwogden. And they received these letters from his estate, naturally, and they were explaining that they had contracted a third-party private company to handle the management of his patients' records. Now, in that letter, which the Courier obtained, it included a form to fill out, and it said that individual records would be $95 plus tax. And so we started receiving calls, even Facebook messages, all these things from patients who were concerned that maybe it wasn't legit, or maybe it wasn't right, or whatever. So we started looking into that. We started asking questions. We started with the Department of Health, and we started talking to these patients who had reached out to us. And we were able to find out that this is kind of the process that happens when there's no doctor for these patients to go to.
So when their files can't be immediately transferred to a new family doctor who's willing to take them on?
Yeah, and so essentially, for two people, it would be $190. For a family of four, that's $320. It's a lot of money to pay out for your medical records. And we did get a lot of questions about, well, sometimes I can see my test results on my phone or online. Why can't these records just be electronically accessed? And those questions are still kind of unanswered. But what we did figure out is that this service, or the fees related to medical records, are not covered by Medicare. It's not really something that's contracted by the province. For non-salaried physicians, the management of records, and I guess for salaried physicians as well, the management of records is kind of dictated by the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And we did get an email saying that they saw it, the office of Dr. Bedwogden did seek legal counsel on what to do with those records, and they suggested this private company, DocuDavid.
Oftentimes, if you know your doctor is to retire, you have time to look for another family doctor, maybe up to a year or so to look ahead. And I think in this circumstance, the reason there were so many people that reached out is it was just so sudden. And there's also a shortage in our region of doctors, so there's not necessarily somewhere where you can go immediately.
It's kind of a little bit of an indictment on the current state of the healthcare system, right? There is nowhere for these patients to go. And when we talked in an earlier episode of This Week Uncut about a story about incentives, we learned that there's almost 18,000 people who have been yet to be matched with a primary care provider in Zone 2, which is all of Southwest New Brunswick. That's a lot of people to be without primary care. So it sort of speaks to the larger issue, right? That these patients are now essentially orphaned in the medical system, and will have to try to kind of work the system a little bit to get what they need. And this population is also an aging population who have greater needs than maybe an urban center where we have younger folks coming. So it'll be interesting. We did ask DocuDavid about the prices that they were charging, and they did confirm to the Courier that they would work with anyone who needs help. And MLA Kathy Baucus actually received some messages as well, as similar to the way that we did. She questioned the health minister in the Legislative Assembly about possible subsidies that could be made available to the folks that need help acquiring their medical records. He confirmed to them that that wouldn't be something that they would do, which falls in line with the fact that it's not covered by Medicare. But she did, her and her staff did work and ask questions, and they were able to confirm that for financial hardship or cases of financial hardship, they'll be charged $25. So, there was some kind of resolution there, but it is interesting to see that folks are kind of being put in this position in St. Stephen.
And I think it's interesting to look at the same time, the municipality is looking at incentivizing healthcare workers to come to the community. Even though it is a provincial mandate, a lot of municipalities are taking it upon themselves to look for solutions in their communities. What I thought was really interesting this week, though, was when we were in our tariff press conference with Premier Susan Holt this week, one of the questions we asked was about real estate agents in the St. Andrews area who have told us that they're seeing increased interest and also increased buyers from the United States, and whether this is a trend we might be seeing across the province. And what Premier Holt, her response was interesting because she talked about the idea that they might be looking at attracting doctors to New Brunswick from the United States who might be looking to leave the U.S. at this point in time. We've seen similar things happen in Nova Scotia. This week, Nova Scotia actually recruited a doctor to work in their province. So we could be seeing similar things happen in our province soon. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
Because we've had an issue with interpretation services, I will be repeating everything I say in both languages. As of now, on April 3rd, it looks like the same as April 2nd, status quo. À ce moment, qu'est-ce qu'on prépare pour le 3 avril regarde comme le 2 avril, le statu quo. Nous attendons le décret à ce sujet afin d'avoir une idée claire de l'impact de cette mesure sur notre province. We are awaiting the executive order on this so that we can get a clear picture of how today's news impacts our province. As New Brunswickers know, 92% of our exports go to the United States. Les Néo-Brunswickois savent que 92% de nos exportations vont aux États-Unis. Et après des mois d'incertitude, ça veut dire de la stress et de la peine inutile pour nos deux pays. After months of uncertainty, this means unnecessary stress and pain for both of our countries. And that hasn't gone away today. Cet stress n'a pas disparu aujourd'hui. Même si on voit qu'il n'y a pas de nouveaux tarifs sur le Canada, on ne sait pas qu'est-ce qui va arriver demain. Even though we don't see new tariffs on Canada today, that uncertainty hasn't gone away. You don't treat your neighbors like this. We know that these tariffs, these unnecessary taxes, end badly for both of our countries. On ne traite pas nos voisins de cette façon. C'est pas de même que tu traites les voisins parce qu'on connaît que ça va finir de mal pour les deux pays. Steel and aluminum tariffs, automobile tariffs, while not New Brunswick's primary industries, will still hurt our country and our economy. Les tarifs sur l'acier et l'aluminium et aussi sur les automobiles, même s'ils ne sont pas les exports primaires de Nouveau-Brunswick, ça fait de la peine à notre pays et à notre économie. So the plan that we announced on March 4th remains in place. We are focused on providing support for affected New Brunswickers, support for New Brunswick entrepreneurs and businesses who, even with this current tariff, without the tariffs announced today, the uncertainty has meant an impact to their purchases and to their clients and to their business activities. And so our support program announced remains in place. Notre plan du 4 mars, ça va rester en place. Notre focus sur le soutien pour les travailleurs du Nouveau-Brunswick, le soutien pour les entreprises affectées par les tarifs, même si les tarifs n'ont pas changé aujourd'hui, on voit que l'incertitude a arrêté des achats, a arrêté des partenariats et a un impact négatif sur les entreprises du Nouveau-Brunswick. Alors, notre soutien va rester en place. Help is available now for businesses who need it. And the team at Opportunities New Brunswick and all of government is ready to support people impacted by this ongoing tariff uncertainty. L'aide est disponible maintenant. L'équipe à Opportunité Nouveau-Brunswick et tout le gouvernement est là pour vous aider si vous êtes impacté par les tarifs et l'incertitude de les activités de l'États-Unis. To date, our government has undertaken many steps to respond. We have stopped the purchasing of U.S. goods. We've signed no new contracts with the United States. We have tabled legislation to promote labor mobility. We have established regular interfaces with New Brunswick exporters, with our border communities, and with counterparts in the United States, governors, congresspeople, senators, to continue the push for a tariff-free regime between Canada and New Brunswick. À ce jour, notre gouvernement a mis en frein l'achat de nouveaux produits américains. On a cessé de signer de nouveaux contrats avec les entreprises américaines. On a mis en place un projet de loi sur la mobilité de la main-d'œuvre. On a des rencontres régulières avec les exportateurs du Nouveau-Brunswick et aussi avec les communautaires frontaliers. On fait un travail continuel avec les gouverneurs, les membres du Congrès, les sénateurs de l'États-Unis pour continuer le travail pour notre but, notre objectif clair, c'est d'avoir un environnement sans tarif entre le Canada et les États-Unis. This moment continues to present us with an opportunity to retool our economy, to diversify our markets, to strengthen New Brunswick's position in Canada and Canada's position in the world. Ce moment nous offre une occasion unique de rééquiper notre économie, de diversifier nos marchés et de fortifier la place de le Nouveau-Brunswick dans le Canada et le Canada dans le monde. Nous savons que les temps sont incertains. C'est difficile de planifier. C'est difficile d'investir. Nous vous soutenons. Nous ferons tout ce qu'il faut. We know that these are uncertain times, which makes it hard to plan and hard to invest. We have your back, and we will do whatever it takes to protect our economy, our workers, our entrepreneurs, and our communities. And we are committed to continuing to communicate with you. On fera le tout possible pour protéger nos travailleurs, nos entrepreneurs, nos communautés, et nous nous engageons à communiquer continuellement dans ces temps d'incertitude. Regardless of what happens to the South, we in New Brunswick are good neighbors. We will look after each other. We will play a strong role in Team Canada, and we will look forward to the opportunities that present themselves on the other side of this.
The real estate agents have said they're seeing an increased number of Americans purchasing homes and even relocating to the St. Andrews area. Do you see this as part of a larger trend across New Brunswick, and what impact might it have on the housing market and economy?
It's certainly interesting to see the volume of Americans expressing interest in New Brunswick. We're seeing that in some encouraging fronts, like in the healthcare space. It's certainly interesting to hear that real estate agents in St. Andrews are seeing an influx of potential buyers from the U.S. I think that's part of the silver lining to this, is that we may have an opportunity to fill some of our critical labor shortages in healthcare and in other areas with people that aren't comfortable with the direction that the United States is going. Alors, on voit que c'est vraiment intéressant de voir l'intérêt des Américains dans notre province du Nouveau-Brunswick pour déménager ici, peut-être pour venir nous aider comme médecins, comme professionnels de soins de santé, qui démontrent cet intérêt-là. C'est intéressant d'entendre que ceux qui travaillent dans le secteur de c'est quoi real estate? Le secteur immobilier, merci Bruce, à St. Andrews voit qu'il y a de plus en plus d'Américains qui s'intéressent à acheter dans notre province, dans cette communauté. Je pense que c'est peut-être la chose un petit peu positive qui vient de ce qui se passe avec les États-Unis, qu'on peut attaquer à des manques de main-d'œuvre dans notre province, particulièrement au niveau des professionnels de santé qu'on a besoin, et peut-être d'autres, dans un moment où clairement il y a du monde qui ne se sent plus confortable avec ce qui se passe dans les États-Unis.
Nick Moore, CTV.
Thank you. Good evening, Premier. What, if anything, do you think that this government or any of the Canadian governments did that might have prevented these new tariffs on Canada from being announced today?
That's a great question, because we have been working tirelessly since the moment the tariffs were announced by the president back in November to build the relationships that we need to with counterparts in the US to get the message out to Americans and American industry about the negative impact that these tariffs will have. They're essentially a tax on Americans that will drive prices up. I think the stock market's reaction was a part of it, and we've seen the stock market take a big hit today just in the last couple hours since the president made this announcement. So I think it's a combination of making visible to Americans how integrated our economies are, showing them how much Canadians buy from the US, as well as the critical nature of the products that we sell to them for them to make their economy work. Je pense qu'il y avait un gros travail qui a été fait depuis le moment que le président a annoncé les tarifs en novembre, que tout le monde dans une position de leadership, le premier ministre a fait un gros travail avec des personnes dans des positions de leadership aux États-Unis, les gouverneurs, les sénateurs, les membres du Congrès, pour rendre visible l'impact sur l'économie américaine, que ces tarifs sont une taxe qui vont monter les prix, qui va avoir un impact négatif sur l'économie des États-Unis. Puis on a vu ça avec les réponses du marché. On a vu que le marché aujourd'hui, dans les dernières 2 heures, s'est diminué d'une façon mesurable qui va résulter dans une perte d'argent pour plusieurs personnes. Alors je pense que c'est tout le travail qu'on a fait pour vraiment rendre visible à tout le monde et à la Maison-Blanche le peine que ces tarifs vont faire sur l'économie américaine. I think it's the sum of all of the work done by Team Canada to make clear the pain that these tariffs will cause the American people and to make that visible to the White House.
That was Premier Susan Holt speaking at the tariff press conference in Fredericton this week. We will be right back with This Week Uncut after this break.
It is crucial that we remain a dependent and vibrant global trading partner, particularly with Canada.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. Another interesting development this week that really highlights the relationship between Maine and New Brunswick was Senator Susan Collins of Maine actually voting with Democrats this week in favor of no more tariffs for Canada. A lot of what President Trump was using to justify the tariffs that he's put on Canada was fentanyl crossing over the border. Now we know that it was less than 1% coming across the Canadian side. This is also another point that Susan Collins stressed when she was making her address this week, that fentanyl really isn't an issue on the northern border. But she did highlight a lot of the ways that Maine relies on New Brunswick. What did you think of what she had to say?
I thought it was really interesting because some of the things she said in her speech are things that I'm really aware of. Cook Aquaculture, Irving Pulp and Paper, Twin Rivers, all of these other things that we're kind of aware of, and it speaks to the intimacy that Maine and New Brunswick share, a lot like other border communities across this country. And I thought it was significant that she decided to kind of step out against her own party and kind of say this is not the way that we want to do things. And while she did support U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to reduce the amount of fentanyl going into America, she did point out that it is coming from the southern border, not the northern border. And so rebuilding that relationship, I think, is going to take time, but this is a great step forward.
Yeah, she really did stand up for her state, stand up for the relationship between Canada and the U.S. as she sees it, especially with the close-knit communities along the border. She referenced a lot of the businesses where both sides of the border are used in the development of their industry. So I think she has a history, though, of doing what she thinks is right and not necessarily going with what the party has in mind. So here is a little bit of Susan Collins in her address this week.
I rise today in support of the resolution introduced by my colleague from Virginia, Senator Kaine, to overturn the emergency declaration for the northern border that is being used to impose tariffs on goods imported from Canada. Mr. President, The Maine economy is integrated with Canada, our most important trading partner. From home heating oil, gasoline, jet fuel, and other refined petroleum products, to Maine's paper mills, forest products businesses, agricultural producers, and lobstermen, the tariffs on Canada would be detrimental to many Maine families and our local economies. Mr. President, of course, I share the President's goal of stemming the tide of dangerous fentanyl that flows into the United States. I commend him for taking far stronger actions to halt this dangerous and deadly flow than did the previous administration. I do not, however, agree with his invoking the powers of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs on Canadian goods and products. The fact is, the vast majority of fentanyl in America comes from the southern border. In fiscal year 2024, less than 1% of fentanyl seizures occurred at our northern border. And our Canadian neighbors are working collaboratively and cooperatively with our government to stop that trafficking. Mr. President, one of the best examples of the intertwined relationship between Maine's economy and Canada can be seen at the Twin Rivers paper mill in Madawaska, Maine, way in the north on the Canadian border. Twin Rivers produces lightweight specialty paper for packaging materials for our nation's newspapers and our retailers' catalogs, for food and environmentally safe papers used in restaurants, and for a wide variety of other paper goods that are used all over the country. The raw pulp for this paper mill in Maine is piped across the St. John River from Edmundston, New Brunswick to Madawaska, Maine. There literally is a pipeline through which the pulp travels between these two sister mills. A tariff placed on this pulp would jeopardize the financial well-being of this vital paper mill, which employs more than 500 people in rural northern Maine. There is not another big employer in that area that could possibly compensate for the loss of those 510 direct jobs. And that doesn't include the indirect jobs, the truck drivers, the loggers, the restaurant owners who would be harmed by the closure or reduction in the operation of this vitally important mill. The tariff would not only devastate Twin Rivers, but also harm hundreds of Maine families. Another example of our integration with Canada is in energy. 95% of the heating oil that is used by most Mainers to heat their homes comes from refineries in Canada. Irving Oil, a Canadian-based company, has 150 gas stations in Maine and supplies 2/3 of the state's gas, diesel, and heating oil. This includes, Mr. President, 100% of the jet fuel that is used by the Air National Guard base in Bangor. Maine consumers, Maine businesses, and the U.S. Department of Defense our own Department of Defense would bear the cost of that Canadian energy tariff. Mr. President, Canadian tariffs would also harm many Maine farmers, lobstermen, and fishermen. According to the Maine Potato Board, 90% of the potash, which is the fertilizer used for growing potatoes, is imported from Canada. Fertilizer accounts for 11% of total input costs to grow our great Maine potatoes. Tariffs on imports like fertilizer will only hurt Maine potato growers. And Mr. President, I grew up in Aroostook County. I know these potato growers. I picked potatoes as a school child when I was growing up. Just recently, a farmer from Mars Hill, Maine, told me that just the threat of tariffs is causing a price increase on seed and equipment. This farmer supplies potatoes to a Canadian company with facilities on both sides of the border. The different facilities have specialized equipment to process potatoes for different uses. Hash browns in one plant, curly fries in another. A tariff on potatoes as they cross back and forth between Maine and Canada would cause terrible harm to this and other growers. Other products are processed back and forth across the border as well. For example, many Maine blueberries are processed in Prince Edward Island. Maine also sends between $200 million and $400 million worth of lobster to Canada each year for processing. There are 240 lobster processing plants in Canada, but only 15 in the United States. I share the President's goal of getting more of that manufacturing done in the state of Maine, done in the United States. But the fact is that if we impose these tariffs on Canadian processing, it's going to be our Maine lobstermen who will bear the cost. It's going to be consumers who bear the cost. I'd like to make mention of another industry that would be affected as well, and that is the aquaculture industry. In Washington County in far eastern Maine, Cook Aquaculture is one of the largest employers with more than 200 direct jobs throughout the state. While they have a processing plant in Machias, Maine, the first step of their salmon processing occurs in Canada before re-entering the United States for finishing. At a time when the Maine aquaculture industry is growing, these tariffs on Canada would jeopardize current jobs and also block future ones. Mr. President, close relationships between and among families on both sides of the border are very common in the state of Maine. It's typical of communities ranging from Calais in the east, Fort Kent in the north, and Jackman in the west. You see it all across the northern, eastern, and western parts of our state because our communities are so integrated. It is not surprising to me that I had a conversation with members of the tourism industry in Maine just this morning who told me that they're seeing cancellations by Canadian tourists who have come for years to vacation in Maine. Old Orchard Beach, for example, is known for the number of Canadian tourists. we don't want to discourage these Canadian tourists who are so vital to Maine's economy from vacationing in Maine because they are so angry at what has happened. Maine families benefit from more than $900 billion in goods and services that are exchanged between our two countries every year. It is crucial that we remain a dependent and vibrant global trading partner, particularly with Canada. Now, I want to distinguish that I think there is a strong case to be made for tariffs on Mexico, on our adversary China, but I don't see the case for Canada. There are areas where Canada does need to do better, and the dairy industry is one. And I hope that we will see that result. And let me conclude my remarks by reaffirming my support for ensuring that the Department of Homeland Security has every tool at its disposal to stem the flow of fentanyl into our nation. But unlike Mexico and China, Canada is not complicit in this crisis, and we should continue working with our Canadian allies to secure the northern border, not unfairly penalize them. Our consumers, our manufacturers, our lobstermen, our blueberry growers, our potato farmers will pay the price. Mr. President, the price hikes that will happen for Maine families, every time they go to the grocery store, they fill their gas tank, they fill their heating oil tank. If these tariffs go into effect, will be so harmful. And as price hikes always do, they will hurt those the most who can afford them the least. Therefore, I will support this resolution, and I urge my colleagues to do so likewise.
That was Senator Susan Collins, who was one of the votes, the four Republican votes that voted alongside the Democrats, hoping to end the tariffs that were imposed because of the emergency at the border that Trump declared. But as we know, there's not that much fentanyl coming over from the Canadian side. It's interesting to say that she still supports the tariffs from Mexico as well, though.
Yeah, I think the party has a stance that it wants to take about drugs crossing the border and impacting Americans, and I think they want to send that message and they want to be strong with it. I just think perhaps that there are some Republicans that think that it's misguided if it's directed at Canada.
Mm-hmm. It's nice to highlight Senator Collins having those words about New Brunswick this week. It's nice to see that when we have this rhetoric online, that when you look more closely, Maine isn't Washington. They're taking a very different stance. We will be right back with This Week Uncut after this break.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
We're going to start with MB Power, some more provincial news. Residential ratepayers are going to face another rate hike of 9.7%. And so the backdrop of that is that in November of 2024, MB Power went to the Energy and Utilities Board to look at raising the rate for residential ratepayers as well as commercial ratepayers. And they did face the first hike in April of 2024, and now they faced a second hike in April of 2025. So what that means for ratepayers is that before April 1st, you would have paid 13.46 cents per kilowatt hour. Now you pay 14.76 per kilowatt hour, and there's actually an additional variance charge of 41 cents per kilowatt hour. So residential ratepayers are really going to start to notice an increase in their power bills, and they'll also see an increase in their monthly service fee of $29.55. But this is, according to MB Power, this is an effort to upgrade their infrastructure, to improve reliability, and to sort of get themselves back on track when it comes to providing service to New Brunswickers. St. Andrews has been through a number of significant storms in the last couple of years, but also unreliability issues. I remember during Christmas there was a significant outage, but also Canada Day, where I was here. It was a beautiful sunny day, but power still went out and businesses lost a lot of money that day. What are your thoughts about this rate hike and sort of what residential ratepayers are facing?
I think it comes at a time when the cost of living is going up astronomically. This also is compounded by new tariffs and uncertainty, so you can feel that frustration boiling over. And it's for people who have been affected by so many outages. We've heard stories of people having to lose all their groceries that were in the freezer and things like that over the big power outages we experienced, particularly the year prior. So you can see why it's frustrating to see this rate hike, especially when you look at the fact that minimum wage did go up very recently, but it still isn't at a place that would be a cost of living in the cities we have in New Brunswick and even the smaller communities.
And it comes at the backdrop of MB Power, who is subject to a third-party independent review of how they're charging customers. We heard reports that were, the subject of different media reports about how people were actually away from their homes over Christmas and saw a significant spike, doubling and tripling of their power bills, or they had a secondary property that they rent that is unoccupied that saw spikes in power even though everything was turned off, and sort of that sort of thing. So they were supposed to come before public accounts in February. That didn't happen. They're sort of saying now April will be when we could hear kind of what they understand the issue was. So, there's a lot going on with MB Power right now, and they really will have a lot of things that they're going to answer about their future in the province.
I think one thing that was concerning this week is that MB Power did release on social media that some of their employees received threats, were also victims of physical assault as well. And it has to do, they say, with customers' frustrations with these rate hikes. But ultimately, that's a scary place to be when citizens are taking out their frustrations on employees who aren't the ones responsible for the rate hike.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that when the power does go out, these are the folks that leave their homes, their families, and they go out and they do the work that's necessary to get power back up and running. So we could exercise some kindness to those folks as they work and try to do their job. They're not the ones that set the rates, and they're certainly not the ones that are charging you at the end of the day. So it's important to kind of just practice civility throughout this process and understand that they're just doing their job.
And we're asking for that civility at a time when we are in a snap election. The campaign season is quite short, and I know that we have heard reports of signs in our riding being damaged. So again, I know we can understand why people's frustrations are what they are right now, but sometimes the way we express those frustrations can be very against the kind of community that we like to have in our region.
Yeah, and if you're unhappy about your current representation in Ottawa, or you don't like a candidate, the way to exercise that frustration or that desire for change is at the ballot box. Your power rests with your vote. So go ahead on April 28th and exercise that power instead of taking it out on campaign signs, which really doesn't achieve very much.
And on April 11th, if you want to know more about the candidates that you have for your riding of St. John, St. Croix, we will be hosting CHCO, The Courier, and the Municipal District of St. Stephen will be hosting Meet the Candidates at the Garsland Civic Center at 7 p.m. That's Friday night, April 11th. We're inviting all the candidates for our riding to be there. There are 7 candidates in total so far. I don't know if they will all appear at the event. We will find out next week, but we are taking your questions. So if you email candidates@chco.tv and send us any questions you have. We will boil those questions down to about the 6 or 7 or 8 main themes we see throughout the questions to make sure that they are top of mind when we have the candidates in front of us on Friday night.
Yeah, and so we're going to turn really quickly to municipal reform. Municipal reform is something that happened a few years ago, and But what didn't happen is the fiscal part of that. So for background, in New Brunswick, there's only one source of funding for municipalities, and that's through property tax. So your municipal government sets your property tax rate. And what happens is if they increase it, they receive more funding. If they decrease it, they get less funding. So for them, it's a double-edged sword. They want to do right by their constituents, but they also want to be able to have enough funding to provide the services. So it's kind of a very delicate balance. And what the Union of Municipalities identified is that there's a $200 million gap in funding for municipalities. And we are noticing that through reform, local governments have more responsibility. They're thinking about childcare, they're thinking about healthcare, they're thinking about housing, but also adding on additional services. And it's in a time when they don't have that extra revenue. So the other component of this is that there's a $2.5 billion gap in infrastructure as well. So residents in Charlotte County will be familiar recently with the boil water order in St. Stephen, and Councillor Joyce Wright actually brought it up that our infrastructure is aging, but that is not unique to Charlotte County. This is province-wide because there has been no real change to how municipalities are funded. So they're really struggling to kind of get what they need in order to provide services at an adequate level. But these are all things that they need extra funding for. We're expecting that in May, councils will start to see some insight into what that fiscal reform is going to look like.
Yeah, we've definitely been dealing with the growing pains of amalgamation for quite some time, but when that fiscal element doesn't catch up to it, it makes it all the more frustrating. I know we were over on Grand Manan on Friday, where you got to sit down with Mayor Bonnie Morris and address this issue among many others. So we will, after this break, be back with the latest from Grand Manan. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
Nathalie, we went to Grand Manan last Friday. It was your first trip to the island now that you've joined our team. I'm curious, first of all, what was your experience like of the island? How did you enjoy it?
Well, I had to go on a boat, so that was an experience in and of itself. I'm quite fearful of boats, so but I made it. It was a smooth ride, and I really enjoyed my time on Grand Manan. I'll certainly be back. I was actually able to do a Your Town Matters, kind of our monthly show with the mayors in Charlotte, some of the mayors in Charlotte County, and we started off by talking about that very critical air ambulance. They're building an air hangar for it. It's now permanently stationed on the island. And as you can see, they're doing a great job. The structure is built, but they're waiting on a few construction materials to kind of get the door hung because it needs to be kind of permanently attached to the floor. So they're doing a great job, and they're really making a lot of progress. But as Mayor Morris pointed out in an earlier interview back in January, they're not really in the air hanging building business, but they're doing a great job over there.
Quite exciting to have that service back in place on the island as well. I know that relieves a lot of worries and concerns of islanders.
Yeah, it's unique. We have these islands, Campbell Island, Grand Manan Island, Deer Island, that are so unique and so special, but they do have very distinct needs, and so it's very good to see that sort of thing. The other thing is that they're resourceful. When we were over there, we were talking about the Scotiabank, and some people might remember that Grand Manan lost its only bank, but they've now turned that into optometry and dentistry services. So they're very resourceful, and that clinic is operating and doing very well. And there's a seniors complex on the island that is really benefiting from those services. So they're very resourceful as well.
Mm-hmm. And even when they might not necessarily be able to attract a certain type of caretaker to come to the island permanently, what's neat about that clinic is different services can block a certain amount of time or a day of the week to use that facility and bring a service to the island and not necessarily have to set up shop there permanently. So it's a really great and resourceful way, like you say, to address those needs of the island.
We really take for granted the ability to just get in our car and drive to the doctor or drive to the mall or what have you, whatever you intend to do. And so that experience really dawned on me when I went over there, and it took us 2 hours to really get there. So it's interesting, but you also put your whole body in the Bay of Fundy?
Why not? I am a woman of my word, and I also like a dare for a good cause. So I think Islanders, and I think maybe all of New Brunswick and even further wide right now knows of Kyle the Drifter. That's his social media name, Kyle Maurer. He lives on Grand Manan. And he started a cold plunge challenge January 1st of this year to raise money for the local food bank on the island. And he was 100 days. So every day from January 1st, he's been jumping in the ocean. He's making these viral videos that he's posted on Facebook, Instagram, and we started following. It's been, then Islanders started sending us the videos too, encouraging us to come, encouraging us to be a part of the plunge, to draw attention to it, so I can't say no to that. So yes, that was my first ocean cold plunge.
Well, you're braver than I would ever be naturally. Vicki's very brave. But we...
well, brave or maybe just crazy, because I didn't know. Thankfully, I didn't ask before it started that we were supposed to stay in the water for 3 minutes, which I did. I did the whole 3 minutes. But I think it was good that I didn't know that going into it, because I think that would have scared me, especially when we got there and we saw all the cars lining the road that had come down to watch, and the school kids and their exchange students from Prince Rupert, BC also decided to take part. So it was a big group of us down on the beach, so we really couldn't chicken out, really had to pull through and make sure we did it.
Listening to the screaming was also a very unique experience, because you could just tell there was kind of like the progressive scream as they were running in, and then the shrill screaming when they realized how cold the water was. But it was also important that we were there to kind of cover the reason Kyle is doing this work, and that the food bank is actually seeing a sharp rise. I wonder what you learned about what's going on the island in terms of what they need.
It was really great of Kyle to bring Zoe Parker from Action Ministries, who take care of the food bank on the island, to the plunge that we were doing. He knew we were bringing the cameras as well, and he thought it was important to hear their side of what a difference this could make for them. He started off with a goal of $5,000. He's in and around 15,000 right now with days to go. And I know, I will point this out, we're filming this on a Friday where he's doing a Tarzan challenge today, and a company on the island's donating $100 for every person who uses the Tarzan rope to get into the ocean today. So it's still going strong for the last remaining days of it. But what was interesting hearing from Zoe is it's stuff we know from anywhere in Canada right now. The rising cost of living is an issue. So groceries themselves are more expensive for food banks to take care of. But on top of that, there's more need than ever. So the cost of groceries is going up, and the number of people using the food bank is going up as well. So those two things together mean that food banks all over are struggling to meet the demand that they now have, which is greater than they've had in years prior. And when you think that, when you think about Grand Manan and their unique circumstances, Zoe was also mentioning the fact that the food bank and Action Ministries also has to consider covering costs of leaving the island for medical appointments, things that we wouldn't think about on the mainland as being another hurdle that Islanders have to cross that can be an expense as well.
It was a pleasure to be a part of that experience and watching the community kind of come together. Very, very special and unique to Charlotte County.
I think that it's true, especially when we've talked about physical assaults on NB Power workers today and campaign signs being damaged. But really why we love living in a small community is because in times like this, when you think the world is really polarized, all you have to do is find someone in a small community doing an initiative to improve the community and see all the people that come out and show their support and want to look out for their neighbors. So much so that I joined Kyle again on Sunday in St. Andrews. He was here to see a show at the Herring Pub. He saw Slow Coaster on Saturday night, so he decided to do his plunge on Sunday in St. Andrews. And dozens of people from St. Andrews came out to either partake in the plunge or watch him do it on the mainland as well. So it's not just a village; it's the whole county that's getting behind this initiative, which is really special and a good reminder in times like these that really it is neighbors and neighbors together here.
Thanks for watching This Week Uncut. We'll see you next week. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.